Good morning. We're live here at the National Portrait Gallery. My name is Tarnya Cooper, and I'm one of the curators of this show, The Encounter, drawings from Leonardo to Rembrandt.
And I'm Charlotte Bolland, and I co-curated this show with Tarnya.
We're going to take you on a tour of the exhibition, so come through. So this is an exhibition about portrait drawing from the life, and we've chosen just under 50 drawings from British collections, both from private and public collections, some of the most remarkable portrait drawings there are in this country. And in this show we were trying to do something rather different, look at the idea of drawing from the perspective of the sitter. So we're thinking about drawing directly from the life, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means as we go around the exhibition. But it's perhaps worth saying, first of all, that portrait drawings only survive, really, because they're part of workshop ephemera. Many of them would have been thrown away, and we're remarkably lucky to have all the body of material that we have today. The earliest drawing in the show is about 600 years old, so I think there's something really extraordinary about the idea of an artist and a sitter sitting down to take a likeness, and we have that remarkable drawing here today. I'm going to pass over to Charlotte, who's going to look directly at one of the first drawings in the exhibition.
So yes, here at the National Portrait Gallery, obviously the first question that we often ask about a work, about a portrait, is who? That is the kind of question that's the forefront of our minds. And you then have the question about the artist, the moment in which this portrait was created, and then of course the questions about materials, techniques, style, function, and the kind of general history of portraiture. But that first foundational question at the gallery is always who? And so that's something we really wanted you to bear in mind as you go around the rest of the exhibition, because for many of these drawings, where they were created as studio tools or studies for portraits, studies for larger compositions, but we've lost that contextual information. All we have is this sort of face on a piece of paper. But still, it's a really good idea to think about that question of who. Who is this person, and who are the people who are involved in the creation of this object? And so this is why we had this first work in the exhibition, which really kind of wonderfully demonstrates that idea of the encounter in a drawing, in which the sitter sort of glances up at the artist, or perhaps at the viewer as you enter the room. It's a kind of constructed image that plays with time. It wasn't made at kind of incredible speed, that the artist has created this idea of a moment in an image. And we wanted to have this portrait first because we do know, or we can surmise, a lot about the who, what, where, when in which this object was created. So the sitter is John Godsalve, and it's drawn by the German artist Hans Holbein the Younger. And their paths probably crossed in London, possibly near the Steel Yard on the north bank of the Thames, where Holbein had the commission to paint portraits of German merchants that were being sent home, and which Godsalve would like to have visited the area in his role as clerk at the King's Court, buying silk threads that were used to attach seals to royal documents. And for these two men, it was a reacquaintance. It wasn't an introduction when their paths crossed, because Holbein had actually painted Godsalve's portrait during his first visit to England in a double portrait with his father. So there was this kind of moment to reintroduce themselves to each other. The intriguing question about this drawing is what its kind of function was, because it's one of the most highly finished of Holbein's portrait drawings to survive, with this kind of wonderful full-colour workup. But it remained in the artist's possession, not in the patrons, not in the sitters. So how might it have functioned? Perhaps it was made for the artist's benefit rather than for the sitters. And at this time, Holbein had returned to England, and it was a very different England. The King's divorce, the great matter, had kind of thrown everything into turmoil in England, and many of Holbein's early patrons, Thomas More, Archbishop William Wareham, had been kind of swept up in that whole moment. And Holbein was looking to find new patrons at court. Godsalve was a protege of the new man at court, Thomas Cromwell. And so perhaps this drawing may have offered a means for Holbein to demonstrate his skills by showing new patrons a sitter who they were familiar with and his extraordinary skill. And so this is the kind of object and questions that we can raise when looking at the rest of the works in the exhibition.
I wanted to take us through to look at a case of drawing materials, because one of the questions is how did this artist make these really most remarkable drawings? So let's go through and have a look. When an artist was first learning to draw, they would start off in a workshop being able to learn to draw directly, not first of all from the life, but using different sorts of techniques. And we've got some examples of those techniques here. You'd start off as an apprentice artist with the technique of silver point, which is basically a piece of silver held in a stylus that you would then draw on a prepared surface, because almost nobody uses silver point anymore. It's a difficult medium in a way to manage, and you create this beautiful ethereal line, a very soft line. What was wonderful for artists who were training is it was possible to rub the line out, so it allowed you to build up your skills and abilities as you were learning to draw. You'd then move on to a different sorts of technique which allowed you to create tonal drawings, and that was black and red chalk. And you can see there's a reproduction here that an artist has created of an eye using exactly that technique of chalk. And while you can draw in a linear way, you can also draw in a very tonal way. And it was great, of course, for drawing faces with the red and the black. And then finally, as an apprentice, you would move on to a much more challenging technique, which was pen and ink. And you can see an example of that here. Wonderful technique for extraordinary spontaneity. I don't know if anyone's ever used a quill pen, but it is a really wonderful thing to try and use, because you have to keep working with it. And we're going to look at some amazing drawings that use these three different techniques just around the corner. The first is by the very well-known Italian artist Leonardo da Vinci, and this is a wonderful drawing which has come to us on loan from the Royal Collection. It's a drawing made around 1504 of Leonardo drawing a figure, anatomy of a man. And it's not a portrait at all, but these were the sort of skills that you would need to get your sense of observation directly from the life by learning to draw directly from the figure. And it's a wonderful drawing, really, for understanding what you can do with red chalk, to just picking up on all the graduations in tone, so beautifully managed, that what Leonardo is interested in is seeing the anatomy of this figure. But without these sorts of skills, you couldn't, of course, begin to create portrait drawings. Now, to show you what a pen and ink looked like, different sorts of technique where you needed to be really remarkably skillful. And this is one of my favourite drawings in the show. It's a sheet by Rembrandt van Rijn, an artist working at this stage in Amsterdam. And he's working very, very swiftly with pen and ink. So you have this sense of being able to capture a swiftly as possible, a sharp profile, a look, a woman here who may be his wife Saskia, who is breastfeeding, and it's all very, very spontaneous, very swiftly done. And Rembrandt is kind of cleverly capturing this all onto one sheet, almost to kind of show off his skills and abilities. He is breathtakingly talented as an artist, and he's using here just picking up a different medium, red chalk, and carrying on with the kind of energy of observation from the life to be able to put together into a sheet. This is almost certainly one of the most best preserved final sheets. Many of these have been cut up, of course, because Rembrandt was such a famous artist, and many different drawings would have been then cut up and sold in different ways. So extraordinarily lucky to have this remarkable drawing in pen and ink. Well, let's go and have a look at some portrait drawings, and Charlotte is going to take us over to have a look at Karachi.
So yes, one of the other things we wanted to do with this exhibition was to bring some different kinds of sitters into the portrait gallery, and particularly those in the studio space, because artists, of course, draw the people in the world around them. That once you've honed your skills to be able to learn to draw from the life, then of course you turn to your particularly studio associates and your friends and family members. And this is something that's a kind of practice that's perhaps exemplified in the work of the Karachi, who were cousins who sort of revolutionized drawing, setting up an academy in Bologna in the 1580s. The cousins Annibale, Agostino and Ludovico Karachi. And their kind of attitude and obsession to drawing, which they kind of did to interrupt all other elements of their daily life, is wonderfully captured in this description by their biographer, Malvasia, saying how, and of all those relatives, friends and others who went to the studio to study, or to commission works, or to see the pictures, or to pass the time, there was no one who escaped being immediately made the object of the closest observation. So drawing portraits of the people around you was part of their daily life. And I'd just like to focus on two works in particular. This extraordinary drawing here, which I think was at the top of Tarnya and my list as we were kind of developing this exhibition, because it completely exemplifies and embodies that idea of the encounter, that it is in pen and ink, and so it has this extraordinary sense of speed. This is a drawing that has been made in the kind of briefest instant as these two men were sharing a space. And Anibale Karachi's extraordinary control of the pen and ink. And so he's kind of flooded certain areas, and you can see in the eye where he's flooded the iris but left a tiny little bit of space for the catchlight in the eye. So this extraordinary control. And we know who the sitter is. It's Giulio Pedrizzano, also known as Mascaroni, who is a lutenist and Anibale Karachi's dear friend. And you have this great sense of the sort of exchange between the two men, with Pedrizzano's sort of haughty expression back at Anibale entirely matched by the bravura way in which he can handle the pen and ink. And what's really interesting about this drawing is which it was a study for a painted portrait, and where the painting is perhaps about Pedrizzano for all time. It's him sort of in isolation. This drawing encapsulates the charged moment between the artist and the sitter at that moment of creating the drawing. And then to move on to this drawing here, which I really wanted to focus on because it's a sort of study in empathy. And that's something, again, we really wanted to encourage visitors to think about when they're looking at the works in the exhibition. So you have this young man with this imploring gaze out at the viewer, and he has a slightly curved spine and a notably thinner physique than the kind of muscular youths who modelled often at the Karachi Academy. And it's quite likely that he is a beggar from the streets, that Anibale was criticised in his early years by critics who were outraged at the fact that he had just drawn studies of beggars and placed them into his large-scale religious compositions, and they thought this had a kind of astonishing lack of decorum. But Anibale was noted for being more at home with common people, with people from the street. His brother, Agostino, was better at the kind of networking, the patronage that you had to sort of sustain as an artist, but Anibale was more comfortable with people just in the streets of Bologna. And with this drawing, you have this extraordinary inscription, "Non so se Dio mi aiuta," I don't know if God helps me. And this is not written in the artist's hand, but in an early Italian hand, so an early owner. And so that idea that kind of when you look at these drawings and you want to give voice to the sitter, this is something that people have been interacting with these drawings for centuries, from the very first owners, wanting to give voice to the sitters. So I'm going to pass over to Tarnya again.
We had enormous fun choosing the selection of drawings in this exhibition, and we wanted to include a body of drawings of children, and there are 5 drawings of children here. Enormously moving drawings, I think. I wanted to focus on 2, and this is a very beautiful drawing by the artist Wenceslas Holler, who is first of all from Prague, but works all across Europe, and then finally comes to England. This is at a moment when Wenceslas Holler is on a travel journey around Europe, in the Netherlands and in Cologne. And I think this is a wonderful, a moving little drawing, so incredibly beautiful, very tentatively drawn in red and black chalk. And you have a sense of the real presence of the young sitter, her lovely orange frizzy hair and her careful wide stare eye. You have a sense that she's sitting there with enormous poise, sort of promising and showing you how good she is being. There is, she's seated on the floor with her hands held. Has she been promised something to sit in that way? We don't know who the sitter is, and it's possible that Holler decided to draw the daughter of somebody he was staying with just while he was travelling around the Netherlands and Cologne. But what we do know is that this little head, this little girl, is included in a published book just shortly afterwards called A Little Travel Book of lots of different heads of people across Europe. So he's captured her likeness for quite a specific reason. There's another drawing here too, which helps us ask the question what it is like to draw directly from the life, and how do you know whether something is from the life? Now, some of that is subjective, and it's a judgment that Charlotte and I have made about these drawings. And I think this is one good drawing to ask that question about. What you're looking at here is a drawing about 1650, made in the Netherlands by an artist we think is Leonard van der Kuken, not a very well-known artist. But I think it's a wonderful drawing because it shows a young girl just on the cusp of adulthood, or adolescence perhaps, and And you have a sense of her straggly hair, perhaps just a little bit undone, beautifully conceived in red and black chalk, and that stare off to the side. There's a sense of which she's slightly slumped, her shoulders are a little bit sort of down, and she's probably, maybe she's been drawn before, she's not that perhaps comfortable to be there. There's a sense of a real moment in time with this drawing, that the particularities of what you're looking at could only be conceived by looking at this drawing, working on this drawing directly from the life. There's another section around the corner which we want to show you, which is about the idea of personal presence. So there are many different drawings by all sorts of different European artists in this show, and I wanted to show you this one by an artist called Francesco Salviati, an Italian artist working in Rome. He, I think in this drawing, is looking at this young boy almost perhaps through admiration and through love. There is something really beautiful about this drawing, and probably unlike many other drawings in the exhibition, it is a drawing which is perhaps slightly idealised. And some of the choices we were making for this show were very much about capturing life as it was, capturing what the head looked like. What you're looking at here with Salviati is him drawing a young boy, which may be his apprentice, his young apprentice called Giuseppe Porta, and it's in the medium of black chalk. So you can see it's incredibly delicately drawn, very, very carefully conceived. But it's almost as though, if it is slightly idealised, the question is then, is this sense of subjectivity, is it in the mind of the artist that this is exactly what this young boy looked like to him? So the idea of beauty being in the eye of the beholder, well, of course, so is likeness in the eye of the beholder as well. So there, I wanted to move on for Charlotte to talk about some drawings which are really the most remarkable drawings created in the English Renaissance by Hans Holbein the Younger.
So these drawings by Hans Holbein are in the Royal Collection, and they offer a really extraordinary moment of survival, because in a 16th century English and British context, they are vanishingly rare survivals, that the kind of studio ephemera is now lost to us of the works on paper. But these drawings survived that kind of transition in that they seem to have entered the Royal Collection shortly after Holbein's death. And they're listed in Henry VIII's inventory, and with the kind of young Edward VI asking them to be delivered to him. And so they make that survival from being a kind of ephemeral object into something that can be bound and treasured. And they also provide a kind of wonderful glimpse of the relative values ascribed to drawings, particularly later in the 17th century, because they've swapped in and out of the Royal Collection at various points. And Charles I actually swapped kind of the whole book, so a large number of German drawings of British sitters, for one small painting by Raphael. So that's the kind of the value judgments that were being made. What's brilliant about being able to display a group in this exhibition is because they allow us to kind of compare the different encounters that Holbein had with his sitters, because you have the constant. It's all the same artist and in a very similar context of the English court. The two different sizes are from his first visit in 1527, and then when he returned in the 1530s, he'd developed this shorthand using a pink preparation to provide the mid-tone for the flesh, and not working on a slightly smaller scale of paper. But the one work I really wanted to focus on was this drawing, which is one of my favourites in the exhibition. This extraordinarily sort of sensitive rendering of a woman's face who is unknown to us. And that one of the kind of wonders of drawings is being able to see the artist's hand at work. You can see each kind of gesture as they make the mark. But in this drawing, I challenge the zoom as to how far, however close you get, that you still can't see it. It's so subtly made. And for Holbein, a larger number of his drawings survive than his paintings. And whilst many of them have notes on them to suggest that they were studies for paintings that are now lost, this drawing doesn't have that. And it seems that some of them were created as works in their own right. And as I said, we don't know who she is, that her quite distinctive headdress is quite a consistent fashion over a number of years at the Tudor court, and is worn by a number of women in different portraits, which suggests it might be royal livery, that she could perhaps be a nurse in the royal household. So this is an image of one of Holbein's peers rather than his patrons, and perhaps created for his own benefit to celebrate a relationship that he had with this woman, rather than necessarily a kind of paid contractual moment. And then I'd like to take you over here for another work in this kind of British English context of a drawing of Henry Parker, Baron Morley, by the great German artist Albrecht Dürer. And this is all about kind of a contractual commission. And it's the drawing that is perhaps the most about status in the exhibition. That wonderfully we know all the details of their encounter because Dürer has left the notes on the paper with his monogram, the date, and identifying the sitter. We know where the sitting took place, that Henry Parker had been sent to Nuremberg by Henry VIII to confer the Order of the Garter on Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, and while there took the opportunity to have his portrait painted by Dürer. And this was the study for the painting. We know that the painting was made. It's listed in an inventory in the 16th century, but is now lost. So all we have of the record is this drawing. But it would have been created very much to kind of give the sitter an impression of what the painting would look like, because this is a number of years before Holbein arrives in England, so it's quite a pioneering bit of patronage on Baron Morley's part. He's really taken advantage of the opportunity. And in this is the kind of most sumptuously he would ever have been dressed. He was acting in the king's stead. And so whereas in many of these drawings here we don't have much indication of clothing, this is almost all about the clothing. That you have this fur-lined gown, cloth of gold sleeves, an enormous gold collar, and in the hat badge, perhaps the slightest sense that depicts St. George and the Dragon, the patron saint of the Order of the Garter. But you have here Dürer's fabulous technique. It's in lead point, which actually didn't need to be on a prepared surface. It's soft enough. But Dürer has chosen this green preparation to act as a midpoint in the tones. So I'm going to pass back to Tarnya.
So we can go around the corner to look at the idea of capturing likeness. But we've touched on lots of different ways or reasons perhaps why artists would have created drawings, in this case with the Dürer as a preparatory drawing for a painting. But sometimes there were other reasons why artists would create drawings, and they could well be, on occasion, objects in their own right to be given away or commissioned. And I wanted to look at several drawings over here in this last section, which is about the idea of capturing likeness. Because one of the remarkable things about looking at portrait drawings rather than paintings is it almost gives you a window into the streets of Renaissance and Baroque Europe. You have many, many different sorts of faces which are captured. The wonderful thing about portrait drawing is it's spontaneous. You can take your materials anywhere you like and you can create a likeness. And what that meant for artists is that they were capturing the faces of all sorts of different people, and not necessarily the kind of people that you would find in commissioned painted portraits, which were usually mainly for the elite. So let's have a look at this wonderful drawing here by a very little-known artist, a French artist called Lagneau. And I think this is a really, really remarkable face. This is not a man that you would want to cross, I expect. It shows somebody wearing the clothes of respectable, middle class, somebody who may be a steward in a big estate, or an artisan, perhaps. The artist has captured the likeness of the face with just extraordinary subtlety. You can see all of the details of this man's face, and if you were to go outside into the street, you would certainly recognise this middle-aged man with curly hair. But we know very little about the artist, and he just is only known through creating portrait drawings, which may have been kept for studio use or may have been given away. There's one other drawing that I wanted to show you here too, by thinking about the range of different sitters that are captured in portrait drawings, and this is the artist Carlo Dolci. And we know from a former inscription on the back of this drawing that it very likely represents the artist's shoemaker. And it's a drawing in red and black chalk again. And you have a sense of this man with his very sharp profile, his sharp nose, as you can see here, and rather weary-looking fellow in some ways. So I guess the question is, why would a drawing like this be made? Was it perhaps exchanged for a pair of shoes, or the repair of a pair of shoes? Or was it that the artist artist, Dolce, just liked to capture his face for his sketchbook so that it could possibly be reused in a painting at a later date. I like to think it was given away for a pair of shoes, and that the shoemaker had quite a good deal by that. Well, one of the things we haven't spoken about is, in a way, why all these drawings exist. And the whole point about being able to create drawings in this period is the availability of paper. Because without all the paper that you can see here, you wouldn't have been able as an artist to have the inventive capabilities to carry on doing new sorts of drawings and making these different likenesses. And paper, the availability of paper in the Renaissance period from 13 and 1400s is really driving the engine of creativity for the Renaissance. So we're extraordinarily lucky still to have this body of work on what is quite a fragile medium. We wanted to encourage people throughout this exhibition to be able to undertake drawing themselves, because I hope by looking at these things closely, you begin to look at the technique and think about the skill and the ability of the artist to be able to capture likeness and to inspire yourself to do drawing. So I just wanted to finish with a quote from the 1400s by an artist called Cennino Cennini, who is giving some advice to artists to carry on drawing. And he says, "Do not fail as you go on to draw something every day, for no matter how little it is, it will be well worthwhile and will do you a world of good." So we hope that you'll come to this exhibition and you'll be inspired to do drawing yourself. The exhibition is on until the 22nd of October. So thanks very much for watching our tour.